The planet known as a death world was not a place most people would even consider visiting. Its name alone brought shivers to anyone who had even a basic knowledge of space exploration. This was a planet where the elements themselves seemed determined to punish any life that tried to exist on its surface. The air was thin, filled with shifting particles of dust and frozen vapor. Violent storms could form in minutes, whipping across the plains with such force that even the strongest structures often crumbled beneath their pressure. The surface was treacherous. Barren deserts alternated with jagged mountains, and forests, if they could even be called that, were full of strange predatory creatures that adapted in lethal ways to the harsh environment. Yet, despite all this, life had found a way to survive here. Not just survive, but thrive in a manner that outsiders could barely comprehend. Among the inhabitants of this unforgiving world were the Death, a community unlike any other in the galaxy. These people had evolved and adapted over generations to withstand extreme temperatures, poisonous flora, dangerous predators, and almost constant environmental instability. From the moment a child was born, survival was not just an expectation, it was a lesson. Every aspect of their society, every tradition, every skill taught to a young Deathworlder was rooted in the knowledge that life on this planet was precious and fragile. They had no choice but to be resilient, creative, and intelligent, because failure often meant death. The Deathworlders' homes were remarkable, constructed with materials gathered from the planet itself. They were built to withstand storms that could shred metal and concrete elsewhere in the galaxy. The walls were reinforced with layers of mineral composites and living plants whose roots strengthened the structure against seismic activity. The roofs were designed to bend and shift in strong winds, absorbing the energy instead of resisting it entirely. Within these homes, life was careful and deliberate. Nothing was wasted. Water was collected from every possible source, recycled meticulously, and stored in hidden reservoirs. Food was cultivated in compact protected areas, often underground or in shielded glass domes, to avoid contamination from toxic airborne particles or predatory creatures. Every part of life was a calculated measure against the chaos outside. Education for Deathworlders was not only about knowledge but about experience. Youngsters were trained to read the land, to understand the weather patterns, and to predict the movements of dangerous animals. They were taught to craft tools and weapons not just for hunting but for defense against unexpected attacks. Lessons in medicine, engineering, navigation, and communication were intertwined with survival skills. By the time a Deathworlder reached adulthood, they were expected to be capable of handling nearly any emergency, both natural and man-made. It was a harsh life, but it created individuals of incredible resilience and resourcefulness, people who could think clearly under pressure and make decisions when mistakes could cost lives. Despite their isolation and the extreme nature of their environment, the Deathworlders were far from ignorant of the larger galaxy. Trade, exploration, and contact with off-worlders were rare, but they occurred. Whenever visitors came, they were often amazed or terrified by the Deathworlders' abilities. Outsiders who spent even a short time on the planet would quickly realize that the locals could endure things that would cripple others. They could navigate treacherous terrain, predict storms with uncanny accuracy, and extract vital resources from places that appeared barren. But these skills were not just for survival. They were part of a culture that valued memory, history, and knowledge passed down through generations. Every event, every disaster, every triumph was remembered and taught to the next generation. Forgetting was not an option because the planet itself would punish mistakes. On the other side of the galaxy, far away from the Death World, a small exploratory ship was beginning a mission that was meant to be routine. The crew was a mix of young adventurers, experienced pilots, engineers, and scientists, all trained for space exploration. Their mission was simple in concept: to survey unexplored regions, collect data on celestial bodies, and report any anomalies or new discoveries. They were confident, perhaps a bit overconfident, as so many explorers tend to be when stepping into the unknown. They had encountered challenges before and had always emerged relatively unscathed. But the universe is rarely so forgiving. Shortly into their journey, the crew experienced a catastrophic failure. The ship's main engines, which had been meticulously maintained, suddenly malfunctioned. Alarms blared, red lights flashed across the control panels, and the hum of life support systems became erratic. Panic spread among the crew, despite their training. Every attempt to restart the engines or contact the nearest stations met with silence. This was not the usual space interference or a minor mechanical fault. They were completely stranded, adrift in an area of space that was far from any known trade route, colony, or inhabited planet. In desperation, the crew activated the ship's emergency transmission system, sending out an SOS, a universal call for help meant to alert anyone within range to their critical situation. They broadcasted their coordinates, their condition, and the nature of the emergency. They repeated the signal over and over, hoping someone, anyone, would respond. Time became their enemy. Oxygen supplies were limited. Food was rationed but would not last for long. Morale began to falter as they realized the universe seemed indifferent to their plight. For days, their cries went unanswered. Routine checks revealed no friendly ships nearby. Any response would have to come from a listener paying attention at exactly the right moment. Meanwhile, on the Death World, life continued under its usual harsh routine. The community was engaged in daily tasks, gathering food, maintaining shelters, tending to machinery, and teaching the young. It was during a particularly quiet cycle of observation that the elders noticed an unusual pattern in the deep space signals they monitored. The signal was faint, intermittent, but oddly familiar. To anyone else, it might have seemed like static, a meaningless blip among countless transmissions. But to the Deathworlders trained to recognize anomalies and remember historical patterns, the SOS had a recognizable signature. It resembled patterns from past missions that their ancestors had studied and preserved in memory. Most of the galaxy's inhabitants, busy with politics, commerce, or personal agendas, had ignored similar signals for years. There was a prevailing sense that someone else would respond, that it was not worth the trouble, or simply that the call was false. The Deathworlders, however, could not ignore it. Their culture and upbringing left no room for such negligence. They had learned from centuries of observation that signals like this could mean life or death. Every decision, every calculation had to consider the potential consequences. Their survival instincts, honed over generations, kicked in immediately. The Deathworlders quickly began analyzing the signal, piecing together its origin, its trajectory, and its urgency. They coordinated a response using the limited technology available to them. Every step of the process required precision. Even a small miscalculation could waste precious time or send rescuers into danger. Yet their training and culture had prepared them for moments like this. While other communities might have debated endlessly, the Deathworlders acted. They prepared their ships, double-checked their equipment, and consulted with experienced members who had survived disasters before. They understood that failure was not an option. At the same time, back on the stranded ship, the crew's anxiety was mounting. Days had passed since their first SOS transmission. They were low on hope, exhausted from constantly monitoring their systems, making repairs, and rationing supplies. The void of space, once a realm of adventure and discovery, now seemed like a silent prison. Every passing hour brought them closer to running out of essential resources. The psychological toll was as severe as the physical danger. Crew members took turns monitoring the sensors, trying to spot any sign of a response. They had begun to accept, grimly, that help might never come. It was at this point that the Deathworlders' actions would prove crucial. Because they remembered, because they had trained themselves to notice and act, they became the only hope for the crew. The story of their planet, the extreme environment, the cultural emphasis on memory and preparedness, the relentless training from birth had all been preparing them for this very moment. They did not seek recognition or reward. Their motivation was deeply ingrained: survival, responsibility, and the unshakable belief that ignoring a call for help was not an option. Thus, the stage was set for an extraordinary intersection of lives and worlds. On one side, a stranded crew, facing the very real threat of death, unaware that anyone had noticed their plight. On the other, a community hardened by generations of struggle, watching signals flicker faintly through the void and understanding immediately the life and death stakes involved. The universe had ignored the SOS, but the Deathworlders remembered. They remembered the lessons of the past, the importance of vigilance, and the potential to save lives when others had failed to act. This introduction establishes not just the physical setting of the story, but also the emotional and cultural framework that would drive the actions to come. It highlights the stark contrast between the helplessness of the stranded crew and the preparedness of the Deathworld. It emphasizes how memory, experience, and culture can intersect with chance events to create outcomes that defy expectation. And it lays the foundation for the rising tension, the critical moments, and the eventual resolution that will follow. The stranded crew's situation grew steadily worse with each passing hour. The emptiness of space, once full of promise and wonder, now seemed oppressive and unyielding. The small ship, which had once been their pride and sanctuary, became a fragile vessel adrift in an uncaring void. Its engines, crippled beyond immediate repair, hummed feebly, incapable of generating the thrust needed to reach the nearest known station. The life support systems worked only intermittently, forcing the crew to conserve oxygen wherever possible. Food supplies were limited, and while rationing helped, it was not enough to guarantee survival for more than a few days. Every system, every resource, was stretched to the edge of failure. The psychological strain on the crew was immense. In the beginning there had been optimism, my hope that a passing ship would notice their SOS, or that their own efforts to repair the engines would succeed. But as the hours turned into days, hope began to thin. Tensions arose in the tight confines of the ship. Crew members disagreed on priorities, argued over rationing, and began to feel the weight of isolation pressing against their minds. Fear became a constant companion. They were far from any help, far from anyone who might notice their plight. Communication with the outside world was almost impossible, and every attempt to send a signal was met with silence. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, on the Deathworld, The local community had detected the faint SOS signal. It was weak, intermittent, and easily dismissible by anyone else monitoring space traffic. Yet for the Deathworlders it was immediately recognizable. Their society had taught them to notice patterns, to remember details, and to take action where others hesitated. The signal was unusual in its consistency, and its encoding matched an old distress pattern that had been archived for decades. The elders of the community, who had studied generations of space missions and survival scenarios, recognized its urgency instantly. To them, ignoring this signal was not an option. The first step was analysis. The Deathworlders carefully examined the signal, breaking it down to understand its origin, its pattern, and its trajectory. They calculated possible locations of the distressed ship based on the transmission frequency and known interstellar coordinates. This was not a simple task. Space is vast, and even minor errors in calculation could mean searching the wrong sector entirely. But the Deathworlders had patience and precision, honed from generations of surviving on a planet where small mistakes could be fatal. Every calculation was double-checked, every assumption questioned. The entire community understood the stakes. Lives depended on their accuracy at the same time. Logistical challenges threatened to slow them down. The Deathworlders' ships were not designed for long-distance travel. They had been constructed primarily for survival on their planet and for short-range excursions into nearby space. Preparing these ships for a rescue mission required ingenuity and improvisation. Fuel supplies had to be calculated precisely. Extra reserves, scavenged or synthesized from local resources. Life support systems, normally tuned for short-term use, had to be modified to sustain the crew for an extended journey. Communications had to be enhanced to ensure that, even in deep space, they could maintain contact with each other. Every modification was critical. Failure could result in disaster before they even reached the stranded crew. Despite these obstacles, the Deathworlders moved quickly. Their culture prized action over hesitation, and they were deeply aware that time was running out for the crew in distress. Teams of engineers, pilots, and strategists coordinated their efforts seamlessly. Some worked on navigation, mapping the safest and fastest route to the SOS coordinates. Others focused on repairing and upgrading the ships, using limited resources to maximum effect. Experienced elders supervised every stage, offering advice drawn from years of knowledge and experience. Younger members were trained to assist and learn, both contributing to the mission and preparing themselves for future emergencies. Back on the stranded ship, the crew was unaware that help had begun to mobilize. They continued their struggle against dwindling supplies and failing systems. Every day was a challenge, and the sense of hopelessness weighed heavily on them. The crew monitored their oxygen levels constantly, rationed their food and water with precision, and attempted makeshift repairs to the engines. The sleep was minimal. Even rest brought anxiety, as the thought of being adrift in the cold void was never far from their minds. They had hoped their source would be noticed, but the silence made them question whether anyone would ever come. The contrast between the two sides, the desperate crew and the vigilant Deathworlders, highlighted the theme of memory, culture, and preparedness. Where others might have dismissed the SOS as a routine or false signal, the Deathworlders' training allowed them to recognize its significance immediately. Their world, brutal and unyielding, had forced them to value vigilance and responsiveness above all else. Their survival depended on noticing every detail, remembering past lessons, and acting decisively. These qualities, cultivated over generations, now became the key to saving lives across the galaxy. As the Deathworlders finalized their plans, they encountered further complications. Space travel is unpredictable. Cosmic radiation, gravitational anomalies, and debris fields could easily derail even the best-laid plans. They had to chart a course that avoided these hazards while still maintaining speed. Navigation required skill, intuition, and experience. The pilots trained in the harshest regions of their planet's surface had an advantage. They were accustomed to reading subtle cues in the environment and making split-second decisions under pressure. These instincts, honed over years of surviving natural disasters, were now being applied to a high-stakes mission in deep space. Resource management was another critical factor. Their ships could carry only so much fuel and supplies. They had to calculate precisely how much oxygen, food, and energy would be needed to reach the distressed ship and bring it back safely. Every gram of weight mattered. Every miscalculation could jeopardize the mission. Engineers worked tirelessly to optimize the load, reducing waste and ensuring that essential systems would remain operational throughout the journey. Their problem-solving skills were tested like never before, but their culture of preparation and self-reliance enabled them to overcome these obstacles. Meanwhile, the stranded crew continued to face mounting challenges. Mechanical failures, previously minor, became major threats. Life support systems faltered under stress. The ship's communications array, their lifeline to the galaxy, flickered inconsistently. Each failed attempt to contact outside help deepened their despair. They had begun to understand the reality that the universe often did not notice individual suffering, that survival could depend on luck, and that help, if it came at all, might arrive too late. Their trust in technology and routine procedures had been shaken, replaced by a gnawing awareness of their vulnerability. Yet, unknown to them, hope was already in motion. The Deathworlders' preparations were almost complete. They had established a coordinated plan. One team would focus on navigation and hazard avoidance, another on ship systems and resource management, and a third on medical support and emergency response. Communication protocols were rehearsed, contingency plans developed, and every member knew their role. They were ready to move at a moment's notice. Unlike other civilizations that might delay, debate endlessly, or ignore a signal, the Deathworlders acted decisively, guided by memory, instinct, and an unshakable sense of responsibility. The tension of this stage of the story is profound. The crew's desperation contrasts sharply with the Deathworlders' preparedness, highlighting the difference between societies shaped by comfort and those shaped by survival. It also illustrates the importance of vigilance and memory. The signal might have been ignored by countless others, but the Deathworlders' attentiveness allowed them to recognize and respond to it. Their culture, often misunderstood by outsiders as harsh or extreme, had equipped them with skills that now transcended their world, enabling them to reach across space to save lives. As preparations continued, both sides experienced heightened pressure. The stranded crew felt the physical and emotional weight of isolation and scarcity. Every system failure, every moment of silence, reinforced the precariousness of their situation. Simultaneously, the Deathworlders felt the urgency of action. They were not just dealing with a distant, abstract problem, they were preparing to confront a real emergency. With lives hanging in the balance, they knew that speed, precision, and coordination would determine the outcome, and they were determined to succeed. The Deathworlders had completed nearly all preparations. Ships upgraded, navigation plotted, resources optimized, and contingency plans in place. The signal analysis had provided an accurate estimate of the distressed ship's location, and they were ready to launch their rescue operation. Meanwhile, the crew continued their struggle, unaware that salvation was coming. The tension of these parallel experiences, the escalating challenges of the crew and the mounting pressure on the rescuers created a powerful narrative contrast. It emphasized the stakes, the skill, and the courage required for what was about to unfold in the universe. Attention and memory can be as crucial as technology or firepower. The Deathworlders' success depended not on luck alone, but on the careful cultivation of skills, the passing of knowledge through generations, and the readiness to act when others hesitate. Their culture of survival and vigilance, tested over centuries, now intersected with a moment of crisis far beyond their planet. The tension between life and death intensified as the stranded crew situation became increasingly desperate. The days that had already stretched endlessly now seemed like weeks, and every hour brought new dangers. Their ship, a small vessel designed for exploration rather than extreme adversity, creaked and groaned under the strain. Life support systems, which had been barely functional, began to fail intermittently. Oxygen levels fluctuated, sometimes dangerously low, and the recycling systems struggled to keep up with the crew's basic needs. Food supplies, already rationed, were becoming dangerously low. Every meal was calculated with precise care, but there was no certainty it would last long enough to see rescue. The physical discomfort was one thing, but the psychological weight of knowing that they might die alone in the vastness of space was another. The crew tried everything they could think of. Engineers worked tirelessly on makeshift repairs to the engines, combining ingenuity with desperation, but the problems were deep-seated. Every attempt to communicate with the rest of the galaxy resulted in nothing. They sent repeated SOS signals, hoping, almost irrationally, that someone would notice. The silence of space seemed absolute. The void felt endless, indifferent, and merciless. Arguments began to break out among the crew, a mixture of stress, fatigue, and fear fueling frustration and anger. Some blamed the technology, some blamed each other, and some simply sank into despair. Yet, beneath the fear, a thread of hope persisted, hope that somehow, someone, somewhere, it might respond to their cries. Thousands of light years away, on the Deathworld, the Deathworlders were already preparing to act. The initial analysis of the SOS had given them enough information to begin plotting a rescue mission. The urgency of the situation was fully understood. They knew that the stranded crew was facing life or death conditions, and any delay could prove fatal. The elders coordinated the community's efforts, assigning critical tasks to every capable member. Pilots prepared ships, engineers checked and reinforced life support systems, strategists plotted courses, and every resource was calculated down to the last unit. Every individual knew that failure was not an option. In their society, survival and vigilance were ingrained, but this mission required a level of precision and risk unlike any they had faced before. Launching the mission required more than preparation, it required courage. The Deathworlders' ships, though robust, were not designed for deep space travel. They had to navigate uncharted regions, some of which were known for cosmic anomalies, asteroid fields, and radiation zones. Any one of these hazards could destroy a ship, or at the very least, severely impede the rescue mission. They relied on their knowledge of physics, engineering, and intuition, honed from years of surviving their planet's deadly storms and treacherous landscapes. The pilots trained for rapid response under extreme conditions, often improvising in life-threatening scenarios, were now applying these instincts on a scale far beyond anything they had faced on the planet's surface. The journey was perilous from the outset. Navigating through dense asteroid belts required split-second decisions. One wrong move could puncture a hull or destroy vital systems. Radiation pockets and gravitational anomalies demanded constant vigilance, as they could distort navigational instruments and throw off calculations. Even small miscalculations could multiply into catastrophic errors, potentially sending the rescuers off course or into danger. Every member of the team had to function at their highest capacity, relying not only on technical skill but on trust in each other, and the unspoken discipline that years of training and survival had instilled. Meanwhile, the crew on the stranded ship had begun to experience the creeping effects of isolation and resource scarcity. Stress, fatigue, and fear had started to erode their cohesion. Small disagreements escalated, and moments of despair threatened to overpower rational thought. Sleep became irregular and restless, filled with nightmares of endless emptiness and malfunctioning systems. Even when resting, the crew remained hyper-aware of the surrounding dangers. Their own ship had become a cage, containing them within a space where every failure could be fatal. They were isolated not only physically but mentally, as the knowledge that no one was likely to see their plight weighed heavily. Back on the Deathworld, despite the pressure, the rescuers remained disciplined. They rehearsed the emergency procedures multiple times, checking and double-checking their calculations. Each potential obstacle was considered, from gravitational hazards to sudden equipment failure. Contingency plans were developed for every plausible scenario, and each team member knew their responsibilities in every situation. Their society's culture of memory and preparation proved critical, whereas others might have hesitated or panicked in the face of uncertainty. The Deathworlders acted with confidence, guided by experience, instinct, and training. As the rescuers approached the coordinates, the tension mounted. Space, though vast, was full of unseen hazards. Asteroid fields became more frequent, radiation levels fluctuated unpredictably, and small debris threatened to puncture hulls or disable critical systems. The Deathworlders had to balance speed with caution, knowing that the stranded crew's survival depended on them arriving quickly but intact. Every maneuver was a test of skill and nerves. One misjudged turn could be fatal, but hesitation could mean arriving too late. The pressure was enormous, yet their preparation allowed them to remain focused and precise, even in these life-or-death circumstances. Meanwhile, the crew on the stranded ship had begun to lose hope entirely. Days had passed with no response to their SOS. Oxygen levels were dangerously low, and the food supply had dwindled to near nothing. Mechanical failures were mounting, and repairs were only partially successful. Morale had reached a breaking point. Panic and fear had become constant companions, threatening to overwhelm even the most disciplined crew members. The psychological toll was nearly unbearable. Every passing minute without rescue felt like a final countdown, yet they clung to the faintest sliver of hope, repeating the SOS signal with trembling hands and voices that had grown hoarse from desperation. Suddenly, a faint glimmer appeared on the ship's sensors. At first, the crew thought it was another anomaly, perhaps a sensor glitch or cosmic interference. But as the readings became clearer, recognition dawned. Another vessel was approaching, precisely calculated, moving with intent and purpose. It was unlike any random traffic they had ever detected. The presence of another ship ignited a spark of hope, a sense that salvation might finally arrive. Fear and uncertainty remained, but now there was also anticipation. The crew could hardly believe that someone had noticed them. Someone had cared enough to respond when all others had ignored their distress calls. The Death, aware that they were closing in on the stranded ship, prepared for the final approach. They had to execute complex maneuvers to stabilize the failing vessel, bring it safely aboard if necessary, and account for any unexpected complications. Even minor miscalculations could lead to disaster. Their ships had to align precisely, accounting for debris, gravitational anomalies, and the compromised systems of the distressed vessel. The pilots relied on intuition honed from years of surviving unpredictable storms and predators on their planet, applying these instincts in space with remarkable precision. Every action was critical, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. As the rescue operation reached its climax, both sides experienced extreme tension. The stranded crew, weakened and exhausted, had little capacity to respond to any instructions or assistance. They could only hope that the approaching ships were capable of helping them. The Deathworlders, skilled and precise, coordinated with each other to stabilize the vessel. They used grappling systems, docking protocols, and emergency support systems to ensure that the crew would be safe. Each member of the rescue team was hyper-focused, aware that a single mistake could reverse all their progress. Despite the overwhelming pressure, their discipline, training, and experience allowed them to execute a plan that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. The operation itself tested every skill the Deathworlders had cultivated over generations. Pilots maneuvered through unpredictable debris and gravitational shifts. Engineers monitored critical systems to prevent failures, and medical teams prepared for immediate intervention. Communication had to be perfect, as misinterpretation could be fatal. Every calculation, every move, was coordinated and precise. The combination of instinct, skill, and experience, all developed in the harsh environment of the Death World, was what made success possible. What might have seemed impossible to any other civilization became achievable because of the unique training and culture of the Deathworlders. Finally, the two ships were aligned, the distressed vessel stabilized, and the crew carefully assisted into the rescue ships. The tense hours of approach, navigation, and coordination had culminated in a successful extraction, though the relief and joy were tempered by exhaustion and the sheer intensity of what had occurred. For the first time in days, the stranded crew could breathe more easily, though their minds were still processing the shock and relief of survival. The Deathworlders had not only reached them but had done so with precision and skill, demonstrating the remarkable capabilities that their harsh upbringing in society had instilled. This moment marked the culmination of rising tension and the critical moment of the story. It highlighted the stark contrast between desperation and preparedness, hopelessness and courage, and isolation and decisive action. The stranded crew had faced almost certain death, while the Deathworlders had used their experience, training, and memory to overcome extreme challenges and perform a heroic rescue. The story demonstrates that survival often depends not only on immediate circumstances but on culture, experience, and the readiness to act decisively when others cannot or will not. After the harrowing and tense extraction, the rescued crew began the slow process of recovery, both physically and emotionally. The moment they had feared for days, the moment they might be abandoned to the vast, cold emptiness of space was over. Yet the relief they felt was tempered by exhaustion and disbelief. Their bodies were weak from limited nutrition, irregular breathing, and the stress of near starvation and oxygen deprivation. Their minds were equally strained, still processing the constant fear, the isolation, and the uncertainty that had consumed them for so long. Even as they floated safely aboard the Deathworlders' vessels, the reality of survival seemed almost unreal. The calm and disciplined, despite the success of the mission, immediately shifted focus to ensuring the crew's well-being. Life support systems were adjusted to stabilize oxygen levels and atmospheric conditions to accommodate the newcomers. Medical personnel checked every member of the rescued crew meticulously. Vital signs, hydration levels, minor injuries, and signs of fatigue were carefully recorded and treated. Some crew members required supplemental oxygen and rapid intravenous hydration. Others, weakened by malnutrition and stress, were given nutrient-dense rations specifically designed for immediate recovery. Despite the advanced technology of the Deathworlders' ships, these procedures were done with an efficiency born of necessity and years of practice. Nothing was wasted, nothing overlooked. Psychological recovery was just as critical. The rescued crew had endured days of fear, helplessness, and isolation. Panic attacks, anxiety, and despair had marked their time adrift, and the memory of drifting endlessly in space left a lingering fear. The Deathworlders, aware of this, offered a calming presence and guidance. They spoke in measured tones, their demeanor composed and unhurried. They shared stories of their planet, their traditions, and how survival depended not just on technology but on mental strength, preparation, and mutual support. These conversations provided a grounding effect, helping the crew shift from fear and desperation to awareness and cautious optimism. Navigation back to a safe and habitable station was the next priority. The Deathworlders' ships were not large, but they were well equipped for long-distance travel through challenging space conditions. The course was plotted carefully, avoiding known radiation zones, asteroid clusters, and gravitational anomalies that could compromise the fragile systems of the rescued vessel. Pilots relied on their sharp instincts, honed from surviving deadly storms and predators on their home planet. Every maneuver was precise, calculated, and coordinated, ensuring not only speed but also maximum safety. The rescued crew observed in awe as the Deathworlders navigated through complex cosmic terrain with confidence and skill. During the journey, the rescued crew began to learn more about the Deathworlders themselves. Unlike most civilizations in the galaxy, these people had survived for generations in conditions that would have seemed impossible to outsiders. They were disciplined, resilient, and deeply connected to their environment. Life on the Deathworld had trained them to respond to emergencies decisively and efficiently, without hesitation. The rescued crew realized that the very qualities that had saved them, the Deathworlders' memory, culture, and preparation, were cultivated from a lifetime of surviving a harsh and often hostile world. Respect replaced awe as they understood the depth of the skills and instincts that had brought them back from the brink of death. As the ships approached a nearby space station, the process of reintegration began. Docking was performed with care, ensuring that the rescued crew could transfer safely without further stress or risk. Medical teams on the station were prepared for immediate intervention if needed. But the Deathworlders' expertise had already stabilized the crew to a remarkable degree. Once on the station, they were provided with rest, nourishment, and medical care designed to restore strength gradually. The rescued crew, exhausted but alive, experienced a profound emotional release. gratitude, relief, and disbelief intertwined, creating a sense of awe at the dedication and capability of those who had saved them. The interaction between the rescued crew and the Deathworlders also emphasized the value of preparation and experience. Every step of the rescue, from detecting the SOS signal to coordinating the complex extraction, stabilizing the failing ship, and ensuring safe travel, highlighted how knowledge and training could overcome even the most dire circumstances. The crew's survival depended entirely on the ability of the Deathworlders to anticipate challenges, remain composed under extreme pressure, and apply their skills with precision. This contrasted sharply with the apathy and inaction of the wider galaxy, which had ignored the initial SOS. It was a stark lesson. Vigilance, memory, and experience could literally mean the difference between life and death. During their recovery, the rescued crew also reflected on the role of chance versus preparation. While the SOS signal might have been noticed by someone else, the Deathworlders' unique combination of culture, knowledge, and readiness made their response possible. It was not mere luck, it was the result of years of surviving and learning, of understanding risks, and of training to act when others hesitated. Every calculation, every maneuver, every decision had been informed by preparation, experience, and instinct. For the rescued crew, this became a moment of profound recognition. Survival in the universe often relied not just on technology or intelligence, but on vigilance, memory, and the willingness to act decisively in moments of crisis. Beyond the technical and medical recovery, relationships began to form between the rescued crew and their saviors. Conversations flowed more freely as fear subsided. The rescued crew asked questions about the death world, the culture, the daily life, and the traditions that had shaped the people who saved them. In turn, the Deathworlders explained the philosophy of survival that governed their lives, the value they placed on memory and learning from past mistakes, and the necessity of preparation in a universe that often ignored warning signs. These interactions created bonds of mutual respect and understanding, bridging the gap between vastly different worlds and ways of life. That as the rescued crew regained strength, practical debriefings began. The Deathworlders carefully documented the condition of the ship, the crew, and the environment from which the distress signal had originated. They assessed what lessons could be drawn to improve future emergency responses and to prevent similar situations from occurring. This was done systematically and without ego. For the Deathworlders, saving lives was not about recognition or prestige, it was about duty, skill, and responsibility. The rescued crew participated in these discussions, contributing observations from their perspective and learning from the expertise of their saviors. The return journey and reintegration into safety also highlighted the resilience of the human spirit, both among the rescued crew and the Deathworlders. The crew, once on the brink of despair, began to see possibilities beyond survival. They experienced a renewed sense of determination and perspective, understanding that life, even when threatened, could continue and thrive when met with care, skill, and cooperation. The Deathworlders, accustomed to hardship, reinforced this lesson. Adversity does not diminish potential, it refines it, preparing individuals to act when it matters most. By the end of the journey, the rescued crew had not only survived but had been transformed by the experience. They had witnessed extraordinary skill, courage, and composure in the face of near-certain disaster. The lessons learned went beyond technical or mechanical knowledge. They understood the importance of preparedness, memory, vigilance, and decisive action. They had been saved not by chance, but by a culture that valued life, training, and the ability to act where others would not. This realization left a profound mark, shaping how they would approach challenges, emergencies, and responsibilities in the future. Finally, the success of the rescue became a story not just of survival but of hope. It demonstrated that even in a vast, indifferent universe, the combination of memory, preparation, and courage could save lives. The Deathworlders had acted decisively when all others had ignored the call. The rescued crew had survived extreme conditions thanks to the skills, instinct, and culture of their saviors. This resolution showed the power of readiness, the importance of attention to detail, and the value of taking responsibility when lives were at stake. It was a victory not only over immediate danger but over indifference, fear, and neglect. The rescued crew's gratitude was immeasurable. They had faced the void and the possibility of oblivion, only to be met by extraordinary skill and courage. The Deathworlders returned to their planet, continuing their daily struggles in an environment that demanded resilience and vigilance, yet they left a lasting legacy. The crew, forever changed by the experience, carried the lessons with them. The universe could be cruel, but preparedness, courage, and memory could bridge the gap between life and death. The resolution of this crisis marked not only survival but the triumph of dedication, skill, and the willingness to act in the face of almost impossible odds. After the immediate crisis had been resolved and the rescued crew had regained strength, a period of reflection began, a time to process not just what had happened, but what it all meant. The trauma of being stranded in the cold, empty void of space left deep impressions on every member of the crew. Days of fear, uncertainty, and the sense of helplessness had weighed heavily on their minds. And though they were alive, survival was only the first step. The emotional and mental recovery was just as important as the physical recovery, and it required attention, patience, and understanding. The rescued crew spent long hours talking with each other, recounting their experiences, sharing what they had thought and felt during their most desperate moments. Each story added context to the magnitude of what had occurred. They began to realize how close they had come to permanent loss, and how much depended on the swift, skilled actions of the Deathworlders. In these conversations, one theme emerged repeatedly: the importance of vigilance and memory. The SOS signal had been ignored by the majority of the galaxy, a blip lost among countless other transmissions. Yet the Deathworlders had not forgotten. They had noticed the faint distress signal, recognized its urgency, and acted decisively. This contrasted sharply with the inaction and indifference that had characterized the rest of the universe. The crew began to appreciate that survival was not only a matter of luck or technology, but of attention, preparation, and the willingness to act when others would not. It was a lesson that would remain with them for the rest of their lives: the importance of never ignoring a cry for help, no matter how small it might seem. The rescued crew also began to study the Deathworlders themselves in greater detail. These people were extraordinary, shaped by centuries of survival in a harsh and unforgiving environment. Their skills, discipline, and instincts were honed not by choice, but by necessity. The crew observed how the Deathworlders organized themselves, how they communicated under pressure, and how every individual had a role that contributed to the survival of the whole. This culture of preparedness was remarkable. It was not simply about technical expertise, but about a mindset, a philosophy of life that emphasized foresight, memory, and action. The crew realized that it was these qualities, more than advanced technology or sheer courage, that had saved them. As they continued their time aboard the Deathworlders' ships and on the safe station, the rescued crew had the opportunity to participate in debriefings and discussions about the rescue operation. The Deathworlders, meticulous and thoughtful, wanted to ensure that lessons were learned from every stage of the mission. They reviewed the trajectory of the SOS signal, the navigation through dangerous space, the extraction procedures, and the stabilization of the failing ship. For the rescued crew, these sessions were not only informative but humbling. They saw how every decision, every calculation, and every coordinated action contributed to their survival. It was a masterclass in teamwork, preparation, and resilience, and it left a lasting impression on them beyond the technical and tactical lessons. The rescued crew also began to reflect on personal responsibility and the value of community. The Deathworlders had acted not for recognition, reward, or fame, but because they understood the duty that came with knowledge and ability. Their culture emphasized that ignoring a problem could have catastrophic consequences, and that every capable individual had a responsibility to act when lives were at stake. The rescued crew, having experienced firsthand what could have happened if help had not arrived, found themselves reconsidering their own approach to responsibility, leadership, and preparedness. The experience became a catalyst for growth, inspiring them to be more vigilant, more compassionate, and more proactive in their own lives and careers. The aftermath of the rescue also prompted deep philosophical reflection. The crew considered the vastness and indifference of the universe. They had drifted for days in a void where no one seemed to care, and yet survival had come through the actions of a few individuals who paid attention, remembered the lessons of the past, and acted decisively. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life, the uncertainty of existence, and the profound impact that a single act of awareness and courage could have. They began to see the universe not just as a place of danger and indifference, but as a realm where vigilance, skill, and memory could alter outcomes and save lives. The rescued crew's relationship with the Deathworlders also evolved over time. Initially, there had been awe, then gratitude, and gradually a deep respect and admiration. Conversations extended beyond the immediate circumstances of the rescue to the broader way of life on the Deathworld. The crew learned about the environmental challenges, the societal structures, the education and training that had produced individuals capable of acting so decisively. They came to understand that the Deathworlders' actions were not extraordinary because they were rare. They were extraordinary because they were the natural outcome of a society built to survive in extreme conditions. This insight left the rescued crew inspired and reflective. Over time, the rescued crew also shared their own experiences and knowledge with the Death. They discussed the nature of the mission, the initial decision-making, the technical failures, and the psychological pressures they had faced while stranded. These exchanges were mutually beneficial. The Deathworlders could refine their understanding of space emergencies and rescue operations, while the rescued crew gained insights into survival, teamwork, and preparation that went far beyond what they had previously known. The dialogue fostered a sense of shared purpose and understanding, bridging the gap between two very different civilizations. As the days passed, the rescued crew's physical condition improved steadily. Nutritional rehabilitation, rest, and medical care restored their strength. But the mental and emotional healing was equally important. They began to regain confidence, to rebuild trust in their own abilities, and to develop a sense of agency that had been nearly destroyed during the ordeal. The lessons of reliance, teamwork, and preparation became tangible as they observed and participated in the disciplined routines of the Deathworlders. Each day, they internalized the values that had saved their lives: memory, vigilance, courage, and decisive action. The aftermath also sparked a broader reflection on societal responsibility and awareness. The rescued crew could not help but think about all the other SOS signals that might have been ignored across the galaxy. How many lives had been lost because someone chose inaction over vigilance? They realized the profound implications of paying attention, of remembering, and of taking responsibility. This reflection inspired a sense of duty, a determination to carry the lessons forward, and a recognition that the choices individuals and societies make can have life or death consequences for others. Over time, the rescued crew returned to their home stations and planets, carrying with them not only stories of survival but also a transformed perspective. They shared the tale of the Deathworlders, highlighting the critical role that memory, preparation, and courage played in saving their lives. The story became a lesson for others in the galaxy. Vigilance matters. Action matters. And understanding the needs of others, especially those in distress, can make the difference between life and death. The rescued crew's experience became a source of inspiration, not only for future explorers but for anyone who might face crises, challenges, or moments of uncertainty. The experience also left a lasting impact on the rescued crew's personal development. They became more disciplined, more attentive, and more proactive in their own lives. The ordeal had taught them the fragility of life, the value of preparedness, and the power of human, or in this case, Deathworlder agency. They carried these lessons into their work, their relationships, and their approach to challenges, forever changed by the experience. Each decision they made thereafter was informed by the knowledge that preparedness, vigilance, and courage could change outcomes in ways they might never fully anticipate. Finally, the story of the rescue became a testament to hope, resilience, and the impact of decisive action. The Deathworlders returned to their harsh and unforgiving planet, continuing their daily lives as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Yet their actions had left an indelible mark on the galaxy. The rescued crew survived not by chance, but because a group of individuals had remembered, acted, and executed a plan with skill and courage. The universe, vast and indifferent as it often seemed, could be shaped by those willing to act, to prepare, and to never forget the value of life. The aftermath and reflection of this story remind us that heroes can emerge from unexpected places, that preparedness and memory can save lives, and that courage combined with knowledge can overcome even the most desperate circumstances. In the end, the rescued crew's gratitude was endless, yet it was more than gratitude. It was understanding, respect, and a commitment to honor the lessons they had learned. The experience transformed them forever, shaping their perspective on survival, responsibility, and the importance of acting when it matters most. Their lives had been saved, but the legacy of the rescue extended far beyond survival. It became a story of courage, preparation, vigilance, and the enduring power of memory and action in a universe that often seems indifferent.